introducción nada más para que sirva como presentación también para los ponentes. ¿Qué significa ser profeta en la actualidad? Quizás más que ser alguien con un don extraordinario para predecir el futuro, el profeta es el visionario que puede declamar un te lo dije una vez que ha ocurrido la catástrofe. La autoridad que se le atribuye a aquel que dispone un conocimiento anticipado es la que da pie a la creación de profecías autorrealizables que antes que anunciar un acontecimiento inusitado operan con vistas a controlar nuestro miedo al futuro. El 5 de julio del 2004, el tabloide norteamericano Weekly World News se apropió de la pieza de Mauricio Catelán, La novena hora, para su portada, obviamente sin dar el crédito correspondiente. La obra fue utilizada para ilustrar la historia de un meteorito que habría golpeado al Papa días después de que este hubiera amonestado a George W. Bush por la tortura de detenidos en la prisión de Abu Ghraib. El artículo narraba que, según las investigaciones, se había encontrado el rostro del diablo grabado sobre la piedra, pero que también circulaban rumores de que el meteorito ostentaba la inscripción Jesús es el Salvador, introduciendo así una duda razonable en la historia. Se podría decir que más que plagiar la obra de Catelán, el tabloide plagiaba su ironía iconoclasta al desatar una situación absurda que se encuentra, sin embargo, profundamente anclada en nuestro imaginario colectivo. Pero también da a pensar que apropiaciones como esta inducen a la aceptación de un poder supremo capaz de dictar el desenlace de situaciones terrenales que nos atañen, independientemente de nuestras creencias personales. ¿Cómo se perfila entonces el futuro del arte y de sus posibilidades de actuar ante dichos escenarios? Esta mesa se titula El artista como viajero del tiempo, y vamos a escuchar las ponencias de 3 artistas cuya obra de alguna manera se añade, como ha escrito Shuddha en el texto introductorio de este evento, en el ábaco de una cuenta larga, esperando que el futuro llegue con cada acto creativo, pero esperando también tener alguna injerencia en la manera en que lo percibimos y actuamos sobre él. Artista, escritor y geógrafo experimental, Trevor Paglen se ha dedicado a rastrear las actividades militares clandestinas del gobierno norteamericano y de sus agencias de inteligencia. Esto le ha permitido hacer visible lo invisible, en particular en aquellos sitios del desierto norteamericano, localidad que desde la expansión hacia el oeste durante el siglo XIX ha capturado la imaginación de los norteamericanos en tanto un espacio de posibilidades en el que uno puede olvidar el pasado y reinventar el futuro en base al progreso tecnológico con toda libertad. Un espacio también que por sus características natas es el espacio perfecto para las agendas ocultas y las teorías conspiratorias, como lo sería también una vez iniciada la Guerra Fría, el espacio exterior, que obviamente es un lugar protagónico en las investigaciones de Paglen, es de lo que nos va a hablar hoy. La obra de Julieta Aranda se ha enfocado, por el contrario, a explorar la manera en que se pueden alterar las medidas unitarias fijas como el tiempo, mismas que rigen nuestra cotidianidad. Con ello ha buscado transformar las narrativas históricas en base a una experiencia subjetiva que percibe como un ejercicio de nuestra soberanía individual. La obra de Aranda abre preguntas como ¿podemos ser árbitros de nuestro propio tiempo? Ya sea que idee un reloj que funcione al ritmo de su propio cuerpo o que reúna en un mismo periódico las notas de prensa relativas al encarcelamiento del zar en el 17, las pruebas atómicas en el desierto de Nevada en 1952 o el alunizaje en 1971. Y por último, la práctica de Sarah Cabbage ha tocado temas como la relación entre los espacios humanos y los naturales, así como problemas ambientales como el cambio climático, la planeación urbana y la explotación natural. Ha realizado proyectos en los que analiza el impacto de la especulación en el mercado de los alimentos o en los que busca recuperar las calles para los peatones. Vamos a empezar con Trevor. La obra de Trevor se ha presentado en varias instituciones internacionales, como el Metropolitan Museum of Art, la Tate Modern de Londres, el Walker Art Center de Minneapolis, la Fundación Andy Warhol de Pittsburgh, el San Francisco Museum of Modern Art y la Bienal de Taipei, la Bienal de Estambul, entre muchos otros.
Hello. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you so much. And thank you for Shuddha and Sophia for inviting me. It's a great honor to be here. And I want to talk about something a little bit weird and goofy, which I think is actually that there's something to say here. I want to talk about space probes. And specifically, I want to talk about some of the cultural artifacts that have been attached to American space probes. I'm most interested in the ones from the 1970s. In the 1970s, there were 4 American space probes that undertook missions to other planets. They went out to explore Jupiter, Saturn, and the numerous moons of these distant planets. The first 2 spacecraft were called Pioneer, and the later two were called Voyager. And these were the first spacecraft to go anywhere near these very distant planets, and they took what are now iconic images from the depths of space. But there was something unique about these particular spacecraft as well, which is that these were the first spacecraft that would ever leave our own solar system. Their mission profiles would have them leave the solar system when they were finished, and they would be destined to wander throughout the universe for the rest of time. Now, while these programs were being planned, a science writer named Eric Burgess, who was covering these missions for the Christian Science Monitor, he suggested that NASA should include some kind of greeting card, some kind of message to aliens in the unlikely event that someone should ever find these spacecraft some point in the future. And NASA, it being the 70s, NASA liked the idea, and they gave astronomer Carl Sagan the job of figuring out what to say. On the first two spacecraft, they included this image. This was the right is this strange constellation, which is supposed to be a map of where the Earth is in relation to the rest of the galaxy. Of course, on the right, you have the figures of the man and the woman standing in front of a silhouette of the spacecraft, which is supposed to say how tall they are. And here at the bottom, you have the planets and the spacecraft leaving the third planet in the solar system. Now, a few years later, NASA, when they undertook this Voyager missions, they once again convened a committee to develop an artifact that would communicate to extraterrestrials should anybody ever find this spacecraft. And once again, they asked Carl Sagan to head up this committee. And he worked on it, Timothy Ferris, Frank Drake, Annie Druyan, and Linda Saltzman Sagan was the core team that developed what we now call the Voyager Golden Record. And this was a gold-plated copper LP that on one hand had 100 images encoded in a video signal onto an LP record, and on the other side was a selection of music and greetings in various languages. And this is what some of those images were. I don't think the sound is working.
تحياتنا للأصدقاء في النجوم يا ليت يجمعنا الزمان
धरती के वासियों की ओर से नमस्कार Siya nibingelela maqhawe sinifisela inkonzo ende
Herzliche Grüße alle.
हम पहुंचे हमें अठे राजी खुशी हाँ तुम उठे राजी खुशी रह जाओ
太空朋友，您好，您食饱未？有闲就来阮遮坐哦。
Hola y saludos a todos.
Now, why in God's name am I talking about this? I mean, this is something laughable to look at. I mean, this is something absurd. So why bother about this? I think this is very interesting, actually, because this, I think, is an example of the grand gesture, like in art or in culture. This is about as grand as it gets, creating this photo album and record of sounds from Earth that is going to allow us to say hello to aliens with. But to me, there's two big questions that have come out for me the more and more that I look at these things. First of all, these sorts of space probes and these sorts of artifacts give us an opportunity to think about time. And more specifically, they give us an opportunity to think about the contradictions in time that are produced in contemporary modes of production. So on one hand, these probes are an opportunity to think about time and to think about contradiction. And in the second instance, these probes and these artifacts give us an opportunity to think about the limits of representation and to think about the limits of communication. And I think by extension, provide us with an entry point to a conversation about what 21st century ethics might look like. So in the first instance, let me explain what I mean by this idea of time and contradiction. These space probes give us an opportunity to think about what it means to make something timeless. Or what are the ways in which humans make things that are even quasi-transcendental. But I do not mean those words, and I don't mean those phrases in the way that you might think that I do. When I say that the artifacts on board these spacecraft are timeless, I mean that literally. I do not mean that metaphorically. These probes and the artifacts on them exist outside of time in a way that is different than the vast majority of all other human constructions. When we think about the longest lasting human artifacts and artworks, we probably think about cave paintings. We probably think about pyramids. Cave paintings have been around for 30,000 years or so. Pyramids, the oldest ones, are about 5,000 years old. Those are extraordinarily long-lived human artworks and artifacts, but compared to the deep time of geology, that's nothing at all. That's nothing at all. If humans disappeared tomorrow, it would only take a few 100,000 years for much of our infrastructure and civilization to vanish to dust. In a few million years, there would be little evidence whatsoever of humans on the surface of the earth. And even that, a few million years, is very short for geologic time. But these space probes don't even exist in geologic time. They exist in cosmological or perhaps galactic time. The material lifespan of these probes and these artifacts is not measured in millions of years, but in billions of years. The lifespan of a space probe is comparable to the lifespan of a star. And this is my point. The materiality of these artifacts exist in time in a way that is so alien to the way that we think that perhaps it gives us a way to look at the ways that we ourselves produce time in our own relationships to time. In other words, what we might call the practical timelessness of the space probe, I believe can help us to recognize other examples of what I've been thinking about as the temporal contradictions in the contemporary world. Again, the space probe is designed to operate for about 10 years, but its materiality persists for billions. This contradiction between the design life of the probe and the material life of it echoes numerous other temporal contradictions produced by contemporary modes of production. Let's think about something very easy, nuclear power and nuclear weapons, something that exists on the timescale perhaps of geopolitics or of engineering as we imagined them, but also exist on the deep geologic time of radioactive waste. Or take something like global warming, which unfolds over tens of thousands of years. That unfolding over tens of thousands of years is produced through a contradiction between the time of the atmosphere and the time of the climate versus the time of coal, oil, or chemical industries, and the turnover times of capitalism itself. Or take something like Guantanamo Bay. Why does this prison continue to exist when even in the last election both candidates pledged to close it? And I would argue that, and it's a more subtle argument that I'm making now, but I would argue that the reason why it still exists is because it exists. In other words, the materiality of the space itself produces a certain future. Now, all of these examples call our attention to the fact that modern modes of production are characterized by what Marx famously called the annihilation of space with time, but I think that the opposite is also true. These examples point us towards what we might call the annihilation of time with space. Thinking about alien artifacts is perhaps a way to think about the increasingly dramatic temporal contradictions that characterize everyday life these days. Now, the second reason why I believe these space artifacts are worth talking about is because they get into the deepest questions about representation. Namely, what is the status of representation? What is the possibility of communication with the absolute other or the alien? And when I started thinking about this problem of space artifacts, my first instinct was to dismiss the idea that there was any possibility of communication whatsoever in these things. I thought these things are complete and utter nonsense. And in a certain way, that I still have that opinion. I still think to a large extent this is a very nonsensical genre, or nonsensical thing to do. And you can probably imagine the reasons why I think this is nonsensical. First of all, these are things that you need eyes to see. So in the first place, you need to have eyes. Then you need to have an understanding of what an image is or what a picture is. You have to understand that images are meant to communicate something, which means that you have to have some kind of communication system which is broadly similar to our own. Beyond that, you need to have an understanding of what representation is and how representation works, and so on and so forth. And these are a lot of assumptions to make of somebody else. These are very high barriers to communication. And I think, how are these artifacts supposed to communicate anything to aliens when we can't even communicate with dolphins or dogs, and they are far more closely related to us than any alien could possibly be? But I'm not entirely convinced by that argument. Because in fact, we talk to dogs and dolphins every day. We do. We don't totally understand them, and I'm sure they don't totally understand us, but there are all sorts of meaningful communications that happen across species all the time. Anybody who has a pet will attest to this. We'll go on and on about it, I'm sure. And there are plenty of smart people who argue that it's not at all unreasonable to assume that we'd be able to communicate with aliens if we were to ever come in contact with them. I've had a long series of conversations with a guy named Seth Shostak at the Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence. This is a real place in the Bay Area, of course. And a friend of mine who's a pulsar astronomer named Joel Weisberg. And we've talked about whether aliens would be able to understand these artifacts if they ever found them. And both of them take the position of, why not? Why wouldn't they be able to understand them? Seth Shostak, for example, says, I say, well, you need eyes to understand this. And Seth says, yeah, you need eyes. But at the same time, if you grow up near a star, eyes are extremely common. They're extremely likely to develop. Eyes have developed independently on Earth more than a dozen times, where they've evolved simultaneously in no relationship to each other. So he thinks that's not an unreasonable assumption, actually. And Joel Weisberg, my other friend, points out, if you're an alien and you find one of these artifacts, then that means you have space travel, because you have to go out to space to get one of these things. And he says, assuming that you evolved on a planet, going to space requires having some version of writing, mathematics, chemistry, physics, astronomy, and so on. Moreover, going to space probably means that you have a society that has some kind of division of labor, and a society that's figured out how to organize divergent groups of individuals' labor towards common goals, which probably means that you have something like language, and so on and so forth. And Seth Shostak finally says, let's look at it this way. Contemporary humans have been able to decode tons and tons of alien languages, whether that's meaningful. But I definitely understand their logic, and I don't think that we can dismiss it outright. But it seems to me the deeper question here, the question lurking behind this, is whether or not the question lurking behind whether we can sensibly talk to aliens is a question that I believe has profound ethical implications. Namely, does the absolute other actually exist? And when I look at the symbols and diagrams and the drawings on the Pioneer and Voyager probes, a part of me sees a very troubling legacy of a particular kind of humanism. In the drawing of the man with his hand up and with the map and the charts to where the Earth is, I see the scratchings of an imperial culture, one that assumes its own modes of communication to be a universal given. And in this sense, I see an ideological form of imperialism. I see an echo of the Spanish missions or the French civilizing missions or the American liberations of Afghanistan and Iraq, for that matter. In other words, in these images, I see the violence of the universal, the fact that the universal usually means white, Western, male, capitalist, subjugating and dominating all others in the names of progress and civilization. But I think that this interpretation of these probes may be too simple. If, in our thought experiment of trying to communicate with aliens, we throw up our hands and say, if there are aliens, they're absolute other and there's no possibility of anything meaningful coming out of an exchange, then we should not do these kinds of projects. And I can sympathize with this. And I can sympathize with this coming from the perspective of communication. But I'm not sure that this is much of an ethical position. And I believe that because this belief in the absolute other or that radically alien harbors just as much potential for violence, if not more, than the humanist/imperial paradigm found in Voyager and Pioneer. The reason is that I think if you believe in this alien, the radical alien, then they're so alien that you have no responsibility towards them. You just say, I don't understand that, it's absolutely alien, and I have no responsibility. And so, for example, we have examples of what that looks like in our society as well. Chickens, right? We treat chickens, chicken is the alien, we can't talk to chickens, we have nothing in common with them, therefore we can, breed them in giant slaughterhouses and chop their heads off, and they're just meat that we grow, right? And I think that is probably what a relationship to the alien looks like. And so for this reason, at the end of the day, I can actually sympathize quite a lot with Carl Sagan and Timothy Ferris and Frank Drake and Annie Drury and the people. I can sympathize what they were trying to do when they designed these artifacts. And so to conclude, why the hell do I care about these artifacts? Why do I think that it's worth bothering to think about a small genre of media designed for aliens? And the reason has to do with the fact that thinking about aliens is a way to think about the universal. And no matter what your philosophical position towards the universal is, whether you think universality is impossible or whether it's fleeting, a notion of the universal seems to be a crucial part of the development of 21st century ethics. And because of this, it seems to me thinking about how to communicate with aliens is something we might want to take more seriously than we usually do, because it might help us understand what those new kinds of ethics might look like. And thank you so much for having me.
Bueno, vamos a seguir con Julieta. Julieta Aranda ha exhibido internacionalmente también en lugares como la NBK, Fondazione Giuliani, en la Bienal de Venecia, Strom Den Haag, y bienales internacionales también, como la Bienal de Estambul, y en otros espacios como Porticus, el New Museum, el Guggenheim Museum y el de Witt, el MUSAC, etc.
Cuando pienso en el fin del mundo, una de las primeras cosas que me viene a la mente es que la fecha de expiración de mi pasaporte es el 21 de diciembre del 2012, que es la fecha del fin del mundo de acuerdo a recientes interpretaciones del calendario maya. Claro está que esto perfectamente puede ser una casualidad, pero también puede ser la evidencia de una sincronía banal entre la caducidad del documento que me permite transitar por el mundo y la caducidad de la historia de ese mismo mundo. Tener un pasaporte que es válido hasta el fin del mundo me da una sensación de inexorabilidad burocrática, a la vez que me hace cuestionar cómo es que medimos el tiempo y, a fin de cuentas, qué es lo que medimos. ¿Cómo se puede medir lo inconmensurable a través de herramientas oficinescas? Quizá lo que pasa es que la intención no es medir el tiempo, sino administrarlo, atraparlo en unidades fijas, instrumentalizarlo, regular su uso y sujetarlo a procesos de evaluación fijados en términos de sistemas de producción. En la narrativa de este simposio, mi pasaporte expira el día del fin del mundo que conocemos. Por supuesto que me pregunto, ¿qué tipo de pasaporte quiero tener después de que caduque este? Pero sobre todo lo que me pregunto es, ¿qué tipo de tiempo y qué tipo de mundo es en el que quiero usarlo? El tiempo fue instrumentalizado a partir de la Revolución Industrial, con la institución de la jornada laboral y la idea de las horas hombre. Esto generó una concepción del tiempo completamente utilitaria. Por un lado, una herramienta que nos permite calcular el valor económico de nuestras actividades, de donde provienen nociones como la de la pérdida de tiempo, para describir actividades que no son consideradas productivas. Y el tiempo también como el auxiliar para determinar la distancia entre un evento y otro. Esta medición puede ser abstracta, tan abstracta como sería describir el intervalo entre este momento y la siguiente vez que me enamore, o puede ser también una medición puntual y específica, utilizada, por ejemplo, para navegar el espacio entre mi cita en la peluquería y la película de las 8. Ya sea superstición, evidencia científica o anhelo apocalíptico, en este momento hay una serie de eventos que apuntan al fin del mundo. Entonces, dentro de esa narrativa, el tiempo se acaba, aunque sea de manera simbólica. Y esta no es la primera vez que esto pasa. Ha habido narrativas similares a lo largo de la historia, purgas apocalípticas. El tiempo empieza y se acaba con relativa frecuencia. Por ejemplo, revisando la cronología de la creación de acuerdo al Génesis de la tradición judeocristiana, es posible darse cuenta de que en ese recuento del tiempo, el tiempo comienza 2 veces. En el primer día se separa la luz de la oscuridad y el tiempo es creado como un derivado de esa separación del día y la noche. El tiempo del primer día de la creación es un tiempo sin medidas, un tiempo de inmovilidad absoluta, como en la paradoja de la flecha de Zenón. El otro tiempo, heliocéntrico, y con una asidera lógica que nos permite utilizarlo como herramienta de medición, no aparece sino hasta el 4.º día de la creación, que es cuando aparecen 2 grandes luces en el cielo, el sol y la luna, que tienen la función de marcar los días, los años y las estaciones. Hay que pensar que este es el trabajo de un solo Dios, y uno puede imaginar fácilmente que una infinidad de dioses pueden establecer, por tanto, múltiples temporalidades con una infinidad de comienzos y finales. En la narrativa dominante en este momento, estamos condicionados a interpretar el tiempo como un pasaje lineal, administrado convenientemente a través de relojes y calendarios. Esta temporalidad está conformada a un orden de consecuencia en el cual recordamos e idealizamos el pasado al tiempo que articulamos y proponemos utopías para el futuro. Un orden en el que el presente se convierte en un momento infinitamente diferido, el instante invisible, asfixiado entre la memoria y la especulación. A mí me interesa la proposición de un tiempo subjetivo, donde el presente puede dejar de ser un espacio infinitamente diferido para convertirse en un espacio infinitamente activo, que no depende contractualmente de una relación fija entre lo que tuvimos y lo que vendrá. Este tiempo subjetivo y flexible, donde es posible actualizar utopías, requiere de unidades de medición subjetivas y flexibles, alejadas de la función de administración de vida y correspondientes a la idea, que no sé cómo traducir, pero que en inglés se diría taking my own time. De cierta manera, el interpretar el tiempo de una manera subjetiva es una forma de soberanía, una forma de ser dueño de uno mismo. Así como solía haber un sistema de longitud subjetiva, con unidades tales como el pie de rey, cuya dimensión cambiaba de acuerdo a las dimensiones del pie del soberano en turno, es posible construir una temporalidad singular, basada en la experiencia del tiempo y no en su administración, en la cual cada uno es dueño de su propio tiempo y organiza el mundo de acuerdo a sus propios parámetros. El tiempo revolucionario, una iniciativa de corta duración que siguió a la Revolución Francesa, fue un intento de reestructurar el tiempo. También llamado tiempo decimal, esta iniciativa proponía adoptar la medición del tiempo al sistema métrico, con un día de 10 horas, donde cada hora consistiría de 100 minutos y cada minuto de 100 segundos. Demasiado alejado del sistema de medición de base 12, determinado por los ciclos de agricultura, que es lo que siempre se ha usado para medir el paso del tiempo, el tiempo revolucionario estuvo en vigencia solamente por 2 años, de 1793 a 1795. A pesar de su corta duración, la existencia del tiempo revolucionario permanece en el imaginario colectivo más allá de un intento fallido. ¿Sin sonido? ¿Cómo así? No. Pero esto es muy bonito. Perdón. Sí, pero no funciona. No. A ver ahí. Entonces. No funciona. Pero esto está feísimo.
The train's now running on time. They're running on metric time. Remember this moment, people. 80 past 2 on April 47th. It's the dawn of an enlightened Springfield.
Okay. En el texto On the Concept of History, Walter Benjamin menciona el tiempo revolucionario diciendo que, y perdón por hablar en inglés, the consciousness of exploding the continuum of history is peculiar to the revolutionary classes in the moment of their action. The Great Revolution introduced a new calendar. The day on which the calendar started functioned as a historical time-lapse camera. And it is fundamentally the same day which, in the shape of holidays and memorials, always returns. The calendar does not therefore count time like clocks. They are monuments of a historical awareness, of which there has not seemed to be the slightest trace for 100 years. Perdón, ok. Empiezo de nuevo entonces. En el texto On the Concept of History, Walter Benjamin menciona el tiempo revolucionario diciendo que the consciousness of exploding the continuum of history is peculiar to the revolutionary classes in the moment of their action. The Great Revolution introduced a new calendar. The day on which the calendar started functioned as a historical time-lapse camera. And it is fundamentally the same day which, in the shape of holidays and memorials, always returns. The calendar does not therefore count time like clocks. They are monuments of a historical awareness, of which there has not seemed to be the slightest trace for 100 years. Yet, in the July Revolution, an incident took place which did justice to this consciousness. During the evening of the first conflicts, it turned out that the clock towers were shot at, independently and simultaneously, in several places in Paris. Personalmente, el tiempo revolucionario me parece una proposición totalmente radical. Es el momento de producción del sujeto en el que el territorio donde se cancela el sujeto gobernado se define no solo en términos de espacio, sino que también se reclama la soberanía sobre el tiempo, a través de este día de 10 horas. Y lo que es muy interesante también es que en nuestros días es precisamente esta medida de tiempo, 10 horas, la que se ha convertido en el símbolo de la alienación de la cadena de producción. La jornada laboral de 10 horas y su peso ominoso le da al reloj de 10 horas que aparece en la película Metrópolis de Fritz Lang un significado completamente distinto al del reloj propuesto por la Revolución Francesa. Un significado que no tiene nada que ver con la libertad, pero sí todo que ver con la opresión. Quizá la resignificación de este símbolo de autonomía temporal quiere decir que, una vez más, es necesario terminar con la historia y comenzar a escribirla de nuevo, reclamando nuestro tiempo. Pensar en estas rupturas de la narrativa temporal me lleva a la serie de ajustes que se han hecho en la IDL, International Dateline o Línea Internacional de la Fecha, que es una línea imaginaria que bisecta la Tierra y separa 2 días consecutivos en el calendario. A pesar de su nombre oficial, no existe una ley, tratado o acuerdo internacional que determine la posición exacta de la IDL, aunque comúnmente se la identifica en los mapas cruzando el Pacífico del Sur a 180 grados de longitud del meridiano cero que se encuentra en Greenwich, Inglaterra. Por mucho tiempo, el archipiélago de Kiribati, un país constituido por 33 islas, estuvo atravesado por la IDL, con medio país viviendo en un día del calendario y la otra mitad en el otro, hasta que en 1995 el archipiélago decidió alterar la IDL, creando una desviación de 2.000 kilómetros en la misma para que así su territorio dejara de estar dividido temporalmente. La línea de tiempo tiene una estructura interesante, es como una cinta de Moebius. Debido a la paradoja de la circunnavegación, que está muy bien descrita en el relato de Julio Verne, La vuelta al mundo en 80 días, la IDL se salta el día de hoy y marca la división entre el día de ayer y el día de mañana. Viéndola de un lado, el lado opuesto es ayer, el otro lado es mañana. Y el día de hoy, el presente, no es un espacio definido, sino tan solo esa línea de tensión en el medio, la posibilidad de actuar entre el pasado y el futuro. También es interesante que, dado que la posición exacta de la IDL no está legislada, esta varía ligeramente entre un atlas y otro, de tal manera que, si superimponemos las diversas representaciones de la frontera entre el ayer y el mañana, nos queda como resultado un límite confuso y un poco tembloroso, que de alguna manera me parece una representación adecuada para el espacio ocupado por el presente. El ajuste realizado en la IDL, literalmente, el poder de Kiribati para mover el tiempo, ha sido una parte de mi trabajo desde hace varios años porque me parece un muy buen ejemplo de lo que es una subjetividad politizada y de su poder para remodelar el imaginario colectivo. Kiribati, uno de los países más pobres del mundo, ejerció el poder de determinar su experiencia sustantiva del tiempo y de afectar la descripción del mismo de manera global. Esto quiere decir que, a pesar de que muchísimas veces Kiribati no aparece en los mapas, porque su posición en la mitad del Océano Pacífico hace que el país se caiga del mapa, regularmente se manifiesta en la forma de la alteración en una línea imaginaria que utilizamos para separar un día del que le sigue. Del mismo modo que el tiempo revolucionario, este acto de reconfiguración temporal aconteció en la arena política, pero sus ecos trascienden por mucho los de un simple gesto burocrático. Después de muchos años de trabajar, inspirada por el ajuste de Kiribati, decidí ir a conocer el lugar. Llegué a la capital, la isla de Tarawa, después de un viaje largo y complicado, armada con toda la información estadística proporcionada por la internet y las bibliotecas, pero sin mucha idea de qué es lo que iba a encontrar realmente. Sabía que Kiribati es un país muy pobre, sin infraestructura turística y con una economía de subsistencia. Sabía que tanto Inglaterra como Estados Unidos realizaron pruebas nucleares entre 1957 y 1962. Y que Japón y Estados Unidos pelearon ahí una batalla en 1943, parte de la Segunda Guerra Mundial. Pero todos estos son datos del libro que en realidad no me decían nada al respecto de lo que iba a encontrar. Y lo que encontré en Tarawa en realidad no hubiera podido describirse de una manera adecuada. La isla está llena de ruinas de la Segunda Guerra Mundial que nadie se molestó en limpiar y que no le pertenecen a nadie porque las circunstancias que motivaron a una batalla ya no tienen vigencia para los que fueron combatientes y nunca tuvieron sentido para los habitantes de la isla, que no fue más que un telón de fondo. Es una narrativa paralela y paralizada, encallada en la historia de una isla de pescadores, que me dio la sensación de un pasado que no ha sido historiado porque no ha sido digerido y porque no es digerible en las circunstancias en las que existe. Escombros de un pasado que está removido completamente de los eventos que le dan razón de ser y que por tanto permanece completamente inmediato en términos de experiencia. Caminando por las playas de Tarawa, entre los restos de tanques y búnkers de concreto, me encontré aproximadamente 400 pies de película de 6 milímetros en un nido de cangrejos ermitaños. Nunca me pude explicar cómo llegó ahí la película, porque por todo lo que sé pude estar ahí desde 1943, que la gente solía utilizar cámaras Bolex o Arri para hacer récords de batallas. Y tampoco puedo saber si la cinta fue expuesta o no, porque la emulsión está corroída por las algas, la sal y la oxidación. La imagen que queda en el celuloide, al final, es otra manera de registrar el paso del tiempo, es otra narrativa del fin del mundo. Y bueno, para terminar mi presentación me gustaría mostrarles un par de minutos de esa película, que les muestro en un segundo. Gracias.
Bueno, vamos a seguir con Sarah Cabbage, quien ha desarrollado instalaciones urbanas y de sitio específico en la ciudad de Seattle, en King County, en la ciudad de Redmond, entre otros espacios y locaciones urbanas. Su trabajo ha sido mostrado individual y colectivamente en espacios como Exit Art, Mess Hall, Roots and Culture, Vermilion Gallery, Soil and Pace, University Gallery.
I'd like to thank Shuddha and Maria and the PAC for their wonderful hospitality and for inviting me here. And it's very, very great to be here with all of you today. It's an honor. I'm talking today about my experience with futures markets through an intervention called Industrial Harvest. With this project, I wanted to address this very complex system of commodities speculation and its impact on real people and real food. So what we're looking at right now is the Chicago Board of Trade, and the Chicago Board of Trade is the institution that started modern commodities speculation, and it's still the largest and most influential commodity exchange in the world. This is the perception that most people have of the Chicago Board of Trade, if you have ever seen images like this. But what most people see as this absurd subculture casts a long shadow over our food system. A commodity is generally a raw material that can be bought or sold in standardized grades and standardized units. For example, these images here, wheat, which is what I was interested in with this project, coffee, oil, corn, gold. And in theory, one commodity unit is exactly the same as the other. Commodities get their value from this abstraction and their fungibility, this ability to kind of move anonymously through the marketplace from one owner to the other. And in yet another level of abstraction, you don't trade real commodities on the Chicago Board of Trade. You trade futures contracts. And these are agreements. They're just pieces of paper. They're agreements to buy or sell a certain amount of a certain commodity at a certain price, deliverable at some date in the future. So with these futures contracts, you're betting on whether the price of the real stuff is going to go up or down. You don't need to ever touch the real stuff. Think of it this way. You don't have to be the jockey to win the money in the horse race. But the paradox is that the price of the futures contracts is the standard that sets the price for the real commodities. So the price of real wheat all over the world is set by prices for wheat futures contracts on the Chicago Board of Trade. On May 11th, 2010, I bought a futures contract for 1,000 bushels of soft red winter wheat, number 2, deliverable in July. At the time, the price was about $5 US a bushel, so it was about $5,000 for the entire contract. And although I could have closed out this contract with a delivery of real wheat, what typically happens is that the contract is closed out in cash. And if you have an interest in the price of real wheat, so if you're a farmer, or you're a baker, or you're a miller, you use the futures market like insurance. So you want to lock in a price for your crop or for your raw materials. And if you're a speculator, you're going to take any transaction that you think can make you money. So this perspective on the future is sort of a cynical one because speculators don't care what happens in the future as long as they make money off of it. 1 month later, I traveled to Chicago to continue my education in the futures market. And if you look, the red line here represents my time in the futures market, and you'll notice it's going down. I was losing money at the time because the euro debt crisis had disrupted the rhythms of the normal market. And that's the other thing troubling about the futures market these days is that there really is no normal market anymore. And I'm not just saying this because I lost money, but the futures market was a capitalist response to a need for predictability in the food system. And even the speculators had a valuable role in this system because they brought liquidity to the marketplace. So they made sure that for every transaction, there's a buyer and a seller. But it no longer works like this. The system has been compromised, and you can see the consequences of that here on this chart, where in 2008, the price of grains, and this is wheat, this was especially the case for wheat, the price went up to record levels. And the story of why this happened basically parallels what happened with the mortgage crisis and the economic crisis in the US right now, which is that Wall Street became interested in commodities and used its political muscle to loosen some key regulations. And now commodities markets have become highly financialized and overly technical, focused on complex derivatives, and are now very unpredictable, and you need to be a Wall Street professional to use them. So the people for which this system was intended to work, those farmers and the millers and the food processors and even the speculators, don't use them as much anymore. Now, this 2008 bubble in the price of wheat drove up the prices of other grains and also of most foods. These Wall Street firms are buying huge volumes of futures contracts. We're talking about hundreds of thousands of more futures contracts in the system. And so this sheer volume of trading overshadows the typical factors that dictate the price, things like the weather or how big the harvest was. And these large volumes of contracts, of course, exacerbate any other change in price, and this is what causes these large price bubbles that we see in 2008, and then they happened again in 2010 and 2011. There were protests around the world in response to the 2008 food bubble, and interestingly, the first was right here in Mexico City about the cost of maize. In Mexico, the price of maize is now more than triple what it was 10 years ago, and this is largely due to Wall Street's entrance into the commodities market. And shortly after that food bubble, you see the number of hungry people in the world going up to over 1 billion for the first time in history. And of course, in places like Asia and Africa, price spikes can much more easily lead to starvation because people rely on these raw, unprocessed commodities, and they're spending more of their income, much more of their income, on food. That's the last graph I will show. Sorry for all the charts. So in late June, I closed out my futures contract at a loss, and then arranged for the purchase of 1,000 bushels of real soft red winter wheat. And just to give you an idea of scale, a bushel is this archaic unit of measurement that is still used in modern commodities trading, and it corresponds to a specific size of basket. So 1,000 bushels will fill the truck on this slide to overflowing. It's about 30 tons of wheat. Here's where the wheat came from. This is a grain elevator that holds 2 million bushels of grain from many of the farms in that area. And this is as far back as I can trace the origin of my wheat. In the US right now, it's very trendy to kind of obsess over where your food comes from, but I was interested in the opposite. I wanted this wheat to be anonymous because this generic lot is kind of what defines a commodity. And since we're time traveling here, I want to just think for a moment about the beginnings of civilization, because wheat was one of the original commodities, and the cultivation of grains was the foundation of civilization. With grains, it was possible to store food for long periods of time and actually amass a surplus. So grain was the first wealth. You can stockpile it just like you would money in a bank. You can use it as a means of control over other people because the person that controls the food supply controls the people. With a food surplus, you can do things like build permanent settlements and commission laborers to build palaces and temples, and specialized professions can develop because no longer does everyone have to spend all their time looking for food. And so wheat carries these two metaphors with it kind of side by side throughout history. One is of nourishment and abundance, and these are two major organizations working with issues of food and hunger, and you can kind of see the wheat motif here. The UN Food and Agriculture Organization and Feeding America, Fiat Panis, means let there be bread. Wheat is also used to symbolize another kind of abundance, and this is the second metaphor, one of wheat as commerce. And these are both coins, one's from the US and one's from ancient Rome. I made some replicas of these coins with bread. In the US, the words bread and dough are also slang for money. So with this project, my purpose kind of became to rescue this tiny bit of grain from the commodity system and decommodify it, give it this new identity that's removed from the realm of commerce. So I had this 1,000 bushels of wheat trucked to a mill and milled into flour, and it made about 20 tons of flour, and this is what 20 tons of flour looks like. This is as it's being delivered to a warehouse in Chicago. Here's the final product. And so then what do you do with 20 tons of flour? To totally remove it from the system of commerce and capital could really only mean one thing, and that's to give it away. And so we're talking about this wheat taking a journey from generic commodity and then one transaction at a time gaining this new identity. So I began kind of a grant program and took proposals from organizations and individuals and let them propose to me what they wanted to do with the flour. Most of it went to soup kitchens and food banks, and these are organizations that feed the hungry. This is the largest donation. This is 10 tons of flour to the largest food bank in the Chicago area. For those of us in the US, the food prices have also had an impact because they've happened, the increases in price have happened at the same time as this major recession. And this is a food bank on the south side of Chicago, and they invited me to come and distribute food at one of their weekly food banks. And this food bank has only been in operation for 5 years, and they serve 10 times more people than they did 5 years ago. And every single food bank I donated to told me that they're struggling to keep up with the demand. There's so many hungry people now, so many more hungry people now than there were a few years ago in our so-called rich country. We have now 1 in 8 people classified as hungry and 1 in 4 children living in a family that sometimes runs out of food. So when I began this project, I wasn't sure that these food banks and charities would want flour, but it's kind of an old-fashioned thing, and maybe people don't bake anymore, but they were happy to receive it, and they were able to use it. This is a food pantry in North Chicago, and I wanted to show how much food they have in this teeny tiny storefront. It was almost impossible to fit anything more in that little space. This is a French convent that runs a soup kitchen in Chicago. They make French pastries, very delicious ones, and sell them to raise money for the soup kitchen. This is a youth farming program. I tried to use all of these transactions and interactions as a way to have a dialogue with people about these dynamics in this commodity system. This is an organization that works with political refugees. We're making flatbreads on a trip to an organic farm. This is a culinary school in Chicago. We're making pizza in a wood-fired oven. Here's the final product. It's a farmer's market in Chicago. These people took about 50 pounds of flour and made bread for their local food bank. So that's just kind of an overview of where all of this flour went. And in the end, this 20 tons of flour made over 20,000 meals, which of course I felt pretty good about. But this is only providing one meal on one day to about 1/4 of the hungry people in Chicago. So more than anything else, this action speaks kind of to the futility of this particular type of charity and the inability of our aid systems to address the structural issues at play. And this is a systemic problem, and it's a global problem. And while we see maybe localism as a necessary part of the solution, there is also this very urgent need to regulate this system that exists now to ensure that it can serve all of us that rely on it.
Bueno, creo que estamos un poquito tarde en el tiempo, entonces me parece que lo vamos a abrir directamente a preguntas y respuestas.
Realmente las tres fueron de mucho contenido que me hicieron pensar, sobre todo la última, sobre el consumo. Aquí en México quisiera mencionar un problema que sucedió a raíz del consumo del maíz, sobre todo el maíz transgénico. En 2003 me tocó hacer una exposición en el Museo de Culturas Populares que se llamó Sin maíz no hay país. Monsanto, la transnacional, demandó a la Dirección General de Culturas Populares porque habíamos acusado su compañía de bajar en Veracruz cada semana lo que equivale a 3 veces el presupuesto de Procampo en México. Mi cuestión va hacia las tradiciones, la cultura. Los indígenas, sobre todo los xontales, tienen que vestir el maíz y hacerle un rito antes de sembrarlo. México tiene 68 tipos de maíces y se están reduciendo al maíz transgénico en todas las casas. Todo lo que ven en la televisión, en publicidad, es maíz transgénico, no es maíz original de México. Entonces, ante esa forma de deterioro que estamos viendo, que afectan tanto las tradiciones culturales indígenas, y no solo esto, la variedad de gustos y de aromas que hay en las tortillas mexicanas, ¿qué respuesta podemos tener ante esos fenómenos? Porque siento es el perder una riqueza, como se está perdiendo la riqueza de muchas lenguas que se pierden. Gracias.
Allá atrás.
Hola, también felicito a los 3 ponentes, pero mi pregunta va para la segunda, se me olvidó tu nombre. Te quiero preguntar cómo te tomas tu tiempo tú en la cotidianeidad.
Julieta. Ya, ¿cómo me tomo mi tiempo? Bueno, esa pregunta, digo, me estás hablando como de darte datos personales, ¿no? Qué sé yo, ver películas, leer, no ver televisión. O sea, no sabría contestarte, no entiendo bien la pregunta, perdona.
Es decir, si es posible que hagas un símil entre esta población del archipiélago que mencionaste y tu vida personal. No sé si en términos de ver películas, pero digamos, cómo te organizas, en fin, cómo tú llevas a cabo un gesto similar,
pues,
en la práctica.
Lo que pasa es que, bueno, me parece, te puedo contestar a nivel personal, pero me parece que mi postura conllevaría a decirte que esa pregunta es tan personal que el hecho de darte un ejemplo como estandarte tampoco tiene mucho sentido, ¿no? O sea, la idea de o sea, ¿qué te puedo decir? ¿No? Lo que yo hago es, no sé, soy artista y mi manera de tomarme el tiempo y de tomarme mi tiempo es hacer trabajo y hacer trabajo que explora todo este tipo de noción. Pero tampoco no me parece que esa sea una universalidad de cómo cada quien se puede tomar su tiempo, ¿no?
Quizás, no sé, no pretendo responder a tu pregunta, pero quizás creo que lo que está planteando Julieta tiene más que ver con precisamente su práctica artística en tanto que está, digamos, señalando un problema, ¿no? Hay una problemática como muy específica y más que nada es quizás de alguna manera hacer que la gente tome conciencia de este tipo de instrumentalización o control que todas estas medidas unitarias pueden ejercer sobre uno, ¿no? Y a ver.
Bueno, me gustaría saber entre todos ustedes cómo se enfrenta un artista individual a una cuestión tan global como las tres que plantean y no sé, tal vez sus estrategias para abordar algo tan masivo y tal vez Julieta, no sé si cómo apropiarte de algo que es de todos y al mismo tiempo darle un contexto y una crítica a través del arte y una postura. Pero, no sé, todo eso de lo monumental y lo minúsculo que uno puede hacer, ¿no?
Bueno, igual es que no es un proceso de apropiación, es más como examinar algo con lo que profundamente no estoy de acuerdo. La idea de que haya cierto tipo de estándares que me dicen cómo vivir mi vida y cómo tengo que medirla y cómo tengo que administrar mi tiempo, me hacen, no sé, crear trabajo que responde y de una manera bastante agresiva no es la palabra, pero bastante directa a ese desacuerdo, pero responder no es apropiarse, ¿no? Me parece que es simplemente puntualizar que existe un problema, o por lo menos para mí existe un problema.
This question's for Trevor. Do you see any relationship between space probes and these satellites, like the Pioneer, etc., and like drones?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, okay. There's so many different ways to answer that question. Okay, so one way to answer that question is we want to think about the space probe in relation to the drone. You can think about the space probe in relation to, there's this, you can situate it within the ideology of kind of American expansion and American exceptionalism. After all, the first probes were called Pioneer. I mean, this is not an accident, right? This going from the West, going into going into space and the great beyond and so on. This is a very American relationship to space. The Russian space stuff is completely different in terms of the kind of underlying ideology. So in that way, yes, there's absolutely a relationship between the kind of American version of imperialism, right, going off into the stars, or going off into Waziristan or whatever it is. So we have this kind of underlying ideological connection between the two. We have a very real material connection between the two in the sense that these space probes are a scientific version of other spacecraft that were developed for telecommunications and specifically military telecommunications. And so there is a direct relationship between the hardware on those space probes and the hardware used in the drone program. And the drone program uses a series of satellites as a set of telecommunications relays, right? Because you have a pilot is in Nevada or the pilot is in Virginia, and the drone is in Waziristan, Yemen, Somalia, wherever it is. They fly them via satellites. The third connection between the two perhaps again goes back to this question of time, in the sense that that kind of these spacecraft are very much a part of the colonization of time, in the sense that it's creating infrastructures that collapse space into time. This is the very kind of old Marxist annihilation of space with time. So that spacecraft is a part of it. The drone is very much a part of that project as well. So it's like the weaponization of space and time. And those, that enables perhaps new geographies of imperialism or new geographies of warfare that we might think about as the everywhere war. The war that is everywhere and nowhere at the same time, which is facilitated by the relationship to time that is produced through these spacecraft, as well as, just the ways in which geography and temporality are reconfigured through these sorts of infrastructures. So I guess those are the three ways in which I immediately see connections between the two.
Bueno, a mí me gustaría preguntar sobre el arte y la temporalidad con el ejemplo que puso Trevor acerca de Carl Sagan, que habla del año cósmico, tomando el primer día como el Big Bang y en la última hora de ese año, no recuerdo cuántos segundos ocuparía la posición, bueno, desde la creación del humano. Y hablando también de los lugares atemporales como Kiribati y Tuvalu, lugares donde la misma geografía los ha apartado del tiempo o ha detenido el tiempo y los ha modificado. ¿Qué visión tienen ustedes sobre cómo debería de ser el arte atemporal, el arte o el objeto atemporal? Me pareció muy interesante la propuesta del cine de 16 milímetros, tomando en cuenta también la idea como de Tarkovsky de esculpir el tiempo. Entonces el cine a mí me parece como una de las expresiones artísticas más cercanas a la temporalidad y me gustaría saber su opinión sobre el arte y la temporalidad en todo su contexto.
Should I start in?
You just start there.
Okay, so my theoretical background, I guess, is in my own work. I'm very influenced by people like the situationists, for example, whose project was their kind of revolutionary project was to reconfigure space, and the idea is that through the reconfiguration of space, you could unleash kind of radical possibilities for the future or possibilities of radical politics. And so part of that project then is like actually reconfiguring space, right? Trying to create new situations, trying to create new geographies, really, that would have vastly different political scripts than what we usually encounter in our everyday life. So we have that idea there. But we can take this idea of the production of space, which is what the situationists were thinking about and what people like Lefebvre were thinking about, and we could apply that to the production of time. So if we're talking about things like the absolute dateline or talking about the numbers of hours or minutes in a day, those are human conventions. Those are things that humans have produced. We think time is a given, that it's something imposed on us. The opposite is true. It's a series of systems that is produced and imposed on the world. Now, perhaps just as the situationists thought about trying to find whether there might be some radical possibility in reconfiguring space, in producing space in different ways, perhaps there are some radical possibilities in the reconfiguration of time. In other words, having the appropriation of time. And it sounds like that's the kind of direction that you're going on, thinking about it. And that's what I'm thinking about as well with these space probes. What would it mean to think about scale in relation to time and think about the production of time, because that you can't separate from the production of space and the production of culture. And so just including or adding a temporal axis to the way that I was thinking anyway was something that these space probes kind of helped me think through.
Bueno, es curioso esto, ¿no? Una anécdota personal, empezando por ahí, es que yo estudié cine originalmente y cuando me decepcioné del cine, no volví a tocar una cámara ni nada que tuviera que ver con hasta que me encontré esta película en Kiribati. Y me hizo pensar mucho en la idea de la colonización del tiempo, que de hecho es algo que mencionaba Trevor, porque me parece un poco que tanta especulación sobre el futuro tiene un poco que ver con que a falta de espacio que ocupar no nos queda más recurso que tratar de ocupar el tiempo que ya no es nuestro. y hay como un desapego al presente y esta idea de ocupar el tiempo, producir el futuro, asegurarnos de dejar una marca, de que se acuerden de nosotros, de capitalizar de algún modo en un futuro que no nos pertenece. En términos de arte, me parece que hay que ser bien cuidadoso en ese sentido y no proponer una receta de qué es el arte contemporáneo, qué es el arte temporal, o qué es el arte tiene igual una función, por lo menos para mí, que de algún modo es bastante simple, que es como decir que la función es imaginarse que el mundo puede ser diferente. Y cuál es esa diferencia también es bastante singular, tampoco hay receta. Una cosa así.
Bueno, pues muchas gracias, ya son las 2 y entonces creo que la siguiente ponencia va a pasar a después de la hora de la comida. Les agradezco mucho.